Hey there, beautiful people. Welcome back to Black Queer Canon. I'm Michael Street.
And I'm Tre'vell Anderson, and we here as your hosts have one goal in mind: to put some respect on the names of Black LGBTQ characters.
Yes, every episode this inaugural season, we're building out our very own canon of the film and TV characters that have paved the way when it comes to Black, queer, and trans representation on screen. And along the way, we'll be joined by some folks with special connections to these characters who'll help tease it all out. Last week, we added Noah from Noah's Ark to the list. Who do we have this week?
Alrighty, so today we're going to be talking about, I think, one of the best anti-heroes in cinematic history. Okay, Cleo Sims from Set It Off. Okay, now 1996 is our year here. Now, I first off, why is she on this list? Because I think when we're talking about Black movies, Black canon, Set It Off is there.
Right.
You know, not Black queer.
Right. The Black, right.
But the Black film canon. That film is there. And so by association, that makes the character of Cleo have a particular level of visibility in culture. And also, we revisit this film so much. I feel like so many folks use this film as a cheeky, kind of flash to who we know Queen Latifah to be.
Right. Today.
Okay, today, yeah.
Today. Yeah. Not then, but today.
Not then, but now. Okay. And also it is a character. She's part of this ensemble, but she has a very clear, strong presence, right? That is like undeniable. So I felt like she was like, when we were coming up with our initial folks before even reaching out, to our survey, we were like, this character needs to be there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was two things, right? Which was one, the sheer visibility of the film itself, and thus the character, but also that, we don't require this for all of the names, but that she did represent this kind of an archetype of the butch lesbian. And so
the stud, to be most specific,
right.
Because we talking about us.
I was about to say niggas, but
well, yes.
I mean, well, yes. But yeah, I think it was both of those things. And, so many characters I feel like came after they always get referenced back, right, to her. And so I think those things sort of together made it sort of obvious that she needed to be on the list.
Definitely an archetype. What other, stud characters do you think fall under this archetype? We've spoken a little bit about Snoop.
Yes, who
from
was
The Wire.
I think someone once called her the deadliest lesbian on television or something like that. Because I mean, the body count was crazy. That lady was something.
Okay.
Same show, Kima from The Wire, I believe, falls in this category. 20s Hattie.
We talked about Hattie, sort of. She got a little film.
Well,
dusting.
there is a spectrum.
They call it a
there we go.
Okay.
I don't think we have any stems really in the list. But yeah, but I think that she's a version, right, of the same archetype. Who else maybe falls here?
I will note many of these characters. Something that has stuck out to me is this, and we'll talk more about it later in our interview, but this kind of aggression, sentiment, spirit, character flaw or aspect of many of them that also feels particularly, operative.
Well, I was just gonna say that I think that's probably because of the fact, right, that like we associate aggression with masculinity so much, right? And so whether it's, I think the easiest way for someone who is a woman to begin to be viewed as masculine, or trying to take a man's place is to be aggressive,
Mhm.
in a
Mhm.
variety of ways, right? I think, you think of words like brutish, that
Mhm.
is a thought to be more of a masculine word. And so I think
Mhm.
that that is likely, the connection there.
Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to talk about is, we've heard a lot of people, I feel like just in, John Q public conversation, talk about set it off as a queer film.
Mhm.
And that is not something that that's not the phrase I would use for it,
Right.
but thoughts, feelings.
No, I feel the exact same way. I mean, I think when I first heard people saying it was a queer film, I thought that they were saying, like, in the same sense that people are like, queer is not a sexuality, it's a way of
Yeah.
thinking and
Uh-huh.
being and
Uh-huh. A
like
resistance, a
yeah, right. And
rejection
so
of.
it is a commentary in ways on the form of,
Mhm.
crime. I mean,
Mhm.
sort of
The
bank
storytelling,
robber. Yeah,
yes.
you know what I mean? Like, so I think it was like a flip of what we
Well,
normally see.
mhm,
And so
mhm.
in that way, it's
So
queer.
you said Merriam-Webster definition
That's
5.
what I thought that they were going, and then I found out the girls meant, like, no, lesbians, and I was like, "Well, okay, you lost me,"
Mhm,
um,
because
because there's one, and I don't know.
one and a quarter.
She don't count.
Cleo has a girlfriend
Yes,
in the film. She
yes,
is there. They talk about her. They
we
talk
see
to her.
her,
We see her,
um,
but
for
she does
maybe
not speak maybe at all.
she maybe has 2 minutes of screen time, like,
Right. Right.
so
So you don't count. You just don't count. You're just negligible.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
if I'm looking at the script, she's not there. So for me, it's just one, and so that's why I was like, I don't know that I would call it a queer film, but for those reasons, I think some people also, one, they say it's a queer film because their attraction to the characters,
Mhm.
which
Mhm. They personalize it.
right.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, okay, but what we call like Fight Club a queer film because men are attracted. I don't really know
Uh-huh.
that that's a
Uh-huh.
real thing. Um, but I do think that like this character, regardless of whether the film is queer or not, is obviously an integral part of the film. And this is the other reason I don't think it's a queer film because I also don't think that her sexuality is pervasive in the film and is as important to
Mm.
the
Mm.
um
Mhm.
to the texture of the film, to even though she's one character, if it was super integral to the plot, then I would say, okay, well, even though it's one character, I still think it's a queer film. But I don't think that her sexuality was integral to the part. I think that instead, you know sure, her demeanor was, her personality was,
Mhm.
but you can be, you know, masculine leaning and still be a heterosexual woman.
Yes, you
So
can.
so
Yes, you can.
yeah, so I mean, people have those opinions, and I'm sure on other podcasts they can argue them. I can't on this one because I don't have that opinion. What about you?
Yeah, I've never considered, even like in a formal film critic,
Mhm.
whatever the thing, I call my job that I do. I've never ever really considered the film as a queer film. I will note, because I am the type that loves a play on words, that
Mhm.
loves a embellishment or added, je ne sais quoi or whatever on top of a word. I do love the idea of like saying that this film is a queer film because it queers
The narrative,
the
right.
narrative, and it queers this
Right,
genre
right.
of storytelling. I'm
Mhm.
into that,
Same. Well, I don't
from
know about
a
into it, but I can see how one could make the argument.
Yeah, I'm into it from like a theoretical
Mhm.
standpoint, but to your point, her sexuality regardless isn't forward
Mhm.
in the narrative in any major, largely meaningful way.
Right.
And so they might want to think a little bit more
Well,
on that. Or you have your opinion.
right.
That's
People have
okay
differing
too.
opinions.
Okay. And yes. And we love that for everyone. Okay, we're gonna take a quick break. And when we come back, we will be joined by Emmy Award winner herself, Lena Waithe.
Welcome back to Black Queer Canon. Joining us to break down all things Cleo is writer, producer, and Emmy winner Lena Waithe. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for making space for this conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, so first off, I want you to take us back to, your first viewing or one of your earliest viewings of Set It Off. What were your thoughts? What were your feelings, particularly about Cleo?
Mm. Well, I got to see it in the movie theater. I think we talked about this before. I saw it in the movie theater with my mom and her friend, and I got to have like a friend with me. And I just remember being changed when I left the theater. I wasn't the same because I was young. I was like 13. But I think seeing such a clear representation of queerness, of strength, of womanness mixed with masculinity, if you will, in Cleo. And I was just floored. And then, because we had VHS back then, I got the VHS and I watch it again and again and again.
Come on, tape.
Okay, just again and again, and then the DVD and again, and then on TV and again and again. And so as I got older and continued to watch these movies, which is what makes something canon, a movie you want to keep going back to. And we always keep going back to Set It Off because there's something about it. And as I got older and got to find those words for myself, I would look at Cleo in a very different way. And I really understood the significance of what Queen Latifah was willing to do at that time. And I think the courage it took to step into the shoes of that character and to breathe humanity into that character and to die with dignity as well. It just continues to say so much to me over the years, over time, which I think is what really great art does.
We want to get back to that significance, but Tre'vell, do you remember the first time you saw it? Did you see it with family? Have you ever seen it with family?
What I was going to say is so interesting is many of the people that we've interviewed, and including yourself, Lena, are able to speak to the experience of like seeing so many of these characters in a theater. And that was not my experience for a number of different reasons. But but I did come to it, I want to say in high school, maybe.
Okay.
And I think similar to Lena, didn't really think in any real way about what I was seeing. I just, thought it was a great movie. I thought it was quite an entertaining and deeply heartfelt and emotional movie. And only after time did I think about like kind of the impact of it. What about you?
Oh, well, I did not see it at any time.
I keep asking you this question.
Well, my family's very specific.
Come on.
Lesbianism was not a thing. Like we did, for example,
Lesbianism.
We didn't watch Color Purple. I mean, it got so I didn't even watch the Smurfs because, as my grandmother said, there's a whole village and only one girl, something's not right. So we couldn't watch that. So like that's just like the level of how censorship was in my household. So I didn't watch it then, but I watched it in college. But also at that point I had seen other representations so it wasn't as, groundbreaking, but I still loved the film for what it was.
One of the questions I want to ask you, Lena and Mikelle, is I feel like now when we look at this character, one of the things that we at least can note is that like this is a strong character. She's super confident, maybe a little aggressive in certain scenes, but she has a tender moment or two with her little boo thing, right? But I feel like when we're talking about a canon of of characters that come to represent the community, this feels like the stud representation, if you will, like the stud spot of that
Yeah,
canon. I want to know
quintessential.
from you all how you all think, the characters like masculinity and confidence kind of, challenged perhaps, or at least complicated, ideas of gender roles, particularly back in the 90s when this came out, but even now as we're talking about representation.
Wow, I mean, that's a really thoughtful question, as you tend to ask. I mean, I think Cleo definitely does have a bit of a tough time expressing her feelings. There is a moment, if I'm not mistaken, she puts a gun in Jada Pinkett
Hmm.
Smith's face, um, and I don't think with the intention of using it, but using it with the intent to intimidate.
Hmm.
I think she says
Um,
that even, right? Like,
Right.
after she slaps her, she's
Like,
like, "I
I
wasn't
won't
gonna
go
you
do
know I
nothing.
wasn't gonna use it."
Yeah.
exactly. But still, that level of aggression
Hmm.
Mhm.
is something that, I think that there's an honesty in that, and something that even we, like, because we're sitting down and we're having a conversation about it, we're pointing it out. But when watching a movie, you're not thinking too much of it, especially because Jada gets her lick back. She's like, "Yo,
Right.
don't ever
Right.
do that again." And I think that even when they sit around and talk and do sort of the Godfather skit, and kind of coming to terms with each other about how we're gonna do this, how we're gonna be a team. Like, we got some stuff we gotta clear out. Cleo is a part of that in her own way, and she's being humorous. Also, is like, I'm just ready to blow some shit up. Like, she's like not really, thinking about the consequences, because she's like, what does it matter?
Mhm.
Like, we struggling, we out here cleaning the building. Like, who cares? And then also, I love, there's this element that they do compare themselves to the men. Like there's some guys they know did the same thing.
Mhm.
Right.
They're like, some dudes did it. Like, why don't we? Why not us?
Right.
And I think for Cleo, that character, she aligns almost. She doesn't behave the way Frankie does.
Hmm.
She doesn't behave. She doesn't have the perm and, with the suit and working at the bank. She's not well behaved. She's not about to have sex with a dude to get some money to put her brother through
Hmm.
Mhm.
college. Like, she's not using her feminine wiles in that way. She doesn't have a kid to take care of.
Hmm.
And so there are things that I think I see in her character that are very layered and very interesting. And also, there's another thing too we can't ignore, is that her love interest, her partner, and it's been said, does not speak
Hmm.
Mhm.
the entire time she's on screen. Now, that could be a union thing. If Gary Gray could be like, "Yo, we had to pay her," so that's what that was. It wasn't meant to be disrespect.
Right.
Right.
Certainly.
So there are things in there that we, as in the community, the mask, lesbian, stud, however you want to identify it, there's some stuff there that needs to be worked out. And because of the time in which it came out, we necessarily didn't have the language we could have right now. And so that's why I do sometimes think we can't always judge the work of the past, but
Absolutely.
rather let it educate us in terms of where we were at the time,
Right.
rather than needing it to show up for us in the way that we now show up. And I think that's what I love about Set It Off, is that Cleo's an amazing character, but it's also a timestamp for us.
Mm.
And it tells us about where we've been, where we've come, and I think still how much further we still need to go.
I love that idea of using these characters, these films as timestamps
Mhm.
of a particular moment, because I do think that some people would on the surface look at Cleo as one note,
Mhm.
right? As like, she's the brute, she's the aggressive, she's the masculine one of,
Mm-hmm.
the
Before.
four of them. And that is true. And also, like you just went through, Lena, there are some really interesting character layers, right, in the narrative as well, that hopefully upon deeper thought, folks go, oh, that is doing something different, and particularly for the time. Now I did want to ask, because Lena, behind your back, I called you the stud in chief of the Hollywoods. And so I would love to ask you about Cleo in comparison to other stud characters specifically, right?
Mhm.
On
Mhm.
TV, on film. I'm thinking of, Snoop from
Mhm.
The Wire. I'm thinking of your very own Hattie from,
20s. Yeah.
20s. What other stud characters come to mind for you as, interesting pinpoints in this visibility conversation?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think yes, the role of sort of the black woman stud, mass presenting lesbian. You have Tasha on the L Word,
Really?
obviously Snoop on the Wire, and I think, and there are other characters, like Dre we had on the Shy, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's like I think what it really is how can we expand the character? How can we the character, or rather this sort of this group of people that are not a monolith,
Mhm.
that do not all act the same. Sam J also, had a show on Peacock as well, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously was showing up as herself, and but playing the character. I think we're all unique to ourselves. Like I might be softer. I
Mhm.
might like with Hattie. I did want to show how she's like a goof. She's like a hot mess. She's like she loves women. She has straight friends who she's not trying to holler at,
Mhm.
and I think that's why Hattie did feel new. I think Denise felt fresh, on Master of None. And I think because we don't really get this representation very often,
Mm-hmm.
but when we see it, we go, "Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. That exists in the world." And I think there's so much pressure on every character that is mass presenting or a stud per se, because then it becomes you sort of become trapped a little bit and created like you can't have that character be too aggressive or do
Mhm.
something mean or have a moment or lapse in judgment, because then the community or the audience will say, oh well, look, this person's violent,
Mhm.
this person's aggressive, this person's toxic,
Mm-hmm.
this person's taking on the worst traits of the masculine definition.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is like women who feel more comfortable in a masculine space have nothing to go on other than the definition of masculinity in which they've been fed by
Right.
society.
Yeah.
So in essence, women are again being burdened with the idea of improving masculinity when we put it on
Mhm.
us
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
to be better, to be the right type of masculine. And yet, but how are we supposed to fix it or change it or adjust it when we are trying to just be comfortable in ourselves, and people assume that we're going to be more aggressive. People assume that we're the aggressor, when usually we're the one being pursued.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so and because some women are curious, and
Mm-hmm.
so that often isn't explored. And we try to explore that on 20s, because we often see, the mask girl, oh, let me be aggressive, let me do this. And it's like more often than not, we're softer than some women who
Mm-hmm.
identify as femme,
Mhm.
especially behind closed doors. And so I think that the mission is to write these characters as fully formed human beings, which means they're going to be flawed just as much as they're going to be, have the need to be seen. And we as a society have to understand, just because a character is queer and brown and different doesn't mean their moral compass is more divine than
Mm-hmm.
someone that isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of this thing that I feel like folks often say, right, which is there is, in order for something to have a little bit, have that authenticity, have that, realness factor,
Hmm.
somebody probably gonna feel misrepresented.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because to your point, Lena, you said this multiple times, Michael, like, human beings are fallible, characters should be fallible as
Yeah.
well. And not having, I feel like with a lot of our conversations, not having a robust, lexicon of
Right.
characters to look at
Mhm.
also, influences people's kind of, sensitivities, if you will, around
Yeah.
certain things.
It's interesting because I think I always kind of hate the conversation around like, "Oh, this is, bad for the community or bad representation," because it's
Right.
like, if you know a lot of lesbians, you probably know a
Mm.
Cleo. Like, some people
Mhm.
are like that, and so, these it's not as if these characters are coming from nowhere. Like, I think about, obviously, Cleo, there you mentioned Snoop, but also there's who I think gets forgotten a lot. There's Kima in The Wire as well, who is the
Ah,
actual detective
Yes,
who's a
Sony
lesbian.
song.
She's
Yeah.
not only a
yes.
lesbian, she's married to a woman. They,
Right.
they're looking to have, or they have a child over the series of the show. Um, and so thinking about even from a documentary aspect, like Cleo would have appeared in The Aggressives, right?
Right.
Like I
Right.
think
Likely.
that like the
Yeah.
idea that like these characters are just tropes that someone made up out of their minds is just
Mm-hmm.
not accurate. And I don't know if the expectation that the on-screen portrayal only be aspirational is realistic or even productive, right? Like I don't know that it's
Agreed.
productive to not have people wrestle with the issues that they see on screen that are really reflections of reality, right? It's good to have
Right.
people say, actually, that's not a great thing that we're this way. It's
Mhm.
not that the representation is bad. It's like that's something we need to deal with within our society, within culture, right? The issues that we
Mm-hmm.
have with how masculinity is not only portrayed, but how it's lived out in real experiences.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you all about, I think, perhaps one of the more memorable scenes in the film as it relates to Cleo, which is her death scene.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Whew.
Uh
Yeah. Tough.
quite a scene.
Very much.
Yeah.
Okay, quite a scene.
Quite a song as well. Quite a
Quite
song
a
choice.
song,
Yeah.
okay? Absolutely. Oh, that movie is just so good. Everything, the music, the acting,
Mm.
everything is 10 out of 10.
Oh my
But that
God. Yeah.
scene I feel like is legendary, like a legendary movie death
Mm-hmm.
scene. We've also heard, Queen Latifah say that like after that, I ain't, she don't you don't see her die
Mm,
in movies and whatnot for a
Mm.
reason, right? So we know that it even had, that kind of impact on her
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you both think about that scene, that moment, how it all goes down, particularly in relationship to, right, this broader conversation that I feel like we also always have with queer characters that
Sure.
end up dying,
right.
right? Is that, some of these narratives have us, in our narratives ending in trauma,
Right. The kill your
in
gaze trope.
the kill your gaze trope. So I wonder, I'll start by saying, it's a bank robbery movie. And so
Yeah.
somebody is probably gonna
Cool.
die.
And
And a few people might die.
not only probably
Yeah.
might, most of them
Right.
die. You know what I mean? It's not as if she was the only one who died.
Right.
That scene is devastating. It's
Mhm.
hard to watch, and yes, we do talk about how we watch this movie again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
It's like what's love got to do with it? It's
Mm-hmm.
like Boys in the Hood. It's
Mm-hmm.
like Menace to Society. We know what's coming.
Mm.
We know, but we still watch because we have these movies are tragedies technically, but somehow uplift us as well. That's the
Mhm.
odd thing. That's why we keep going back to them because they remind us. They feel familiar, and but that death scene is is the most gangster thing I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
She does die, I believe, with dignity.
Mhm.
It is brutal. I remember feeling that as a young person, and anytime I watch it, it does never becomes less difficult
Mhm.
to have her survive. Even though yes, we do know one of the four survives, and but Sony's sort of our it's a quad, but Jada's character is very much our protagonist in a way.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they don't kill the protagonist per se, but her friends, all three of them, go,
Right.
and we have to watch her lose each one. We watch her lose her brother. We watch her. There's so much devastation in the film, and that's also I think intentional and on purpose to show you the levels that she will go to get out,
Mhm.
and that's why she's running literally. But that Cleo death scene in the car, it is forever impactful,
Yeah.
and I think it's important. I think it's important for us to see you know, that it's some people may disagree, and they would be right in their argument
Mhm.
that maybe we don't need to see that in a fictitious way because we see it so much in real life. But I don't regret the decisions those creative team made,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
because it changed me and it clearly influenced me in
Mm-hmm.
many ways,
Yeah.
even in my own work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it made me not afraid to do the hard thing
Mhm.
at the end of a movie. And I know that's a direct reflection from me seeing that film in the movie theater and sitting through those three deaths
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and walking out and knowing that it's a movie, but it's a movie that really wanted to shake me awake.
Mhm.
And I'm glad it did, and I continue to go back to it. So clearly, I was all right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, I think we're all probably on the same page, but I think that, you know, she wasn't the only one who died, so for me, it wasn't a kill your gaze. I think some people have complaints about it being the most brutal death, but
Mm-hmm.
in that, my response is she was the most brutal character, and so you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not as if there was not a reason for it.
Right. It was
Uh,
proportional
yeah, it
to
was
the
proportional, and
character.
you know, as you were talking, I was going to say I felt like she went out like a G. When you know what I mean? It's the same thing, and I'm like, that's who her character was.
Yeah.
That's the character they've built this entire time. Is that's who she? I don't want to say who she wanted to be. That's who she was. And so to
Right.
go out in that way, you know, just you know, for if we're gonna be what heteronormative, right? It's if she was gonna be the man, she was gonna go out like a man. You know what I mean? I think
Mhm.
that was the thing. Um, I did feel like it had this level of dignity of at the end of the day, she chose to continue to continue with her aggression, even though
Mhm.
she knew she was outnumbered. She knew what was going to happen. You know what I mean? You don't come up in that kind of community or environment and don't know that if you do the things that she did with that many cops around you, what's going to happen, right? You know that's going to happen. And she came to terms with that and was okay with that and continued on because that's how she wanted to die. And so in that way, I like everyone else, I thought it was super brutal, but I didn't find it to be an issue. I felt like its brutality and everything else um, found enough basis in the text, right? And in life.
Yeah. One
Mhm.
question I have for you, Lena, just to take it back to you seeing it, you know, with your family. You know, we are obviously specifically talking about Cleo and that character.
Mhm.
How did your family, did the broader John Q public respond to that character back then, if you can remember?
You know, I mean, I think it's a really good question. It wasn't. It was not a topic of discussion.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't like that. Wasn't even. I don't recall anybody saying, "Oh, so she was gay or what?"
Right.
Queen Latifah, and who knows? Some of that might be because Queen Latifah at that point was really, I mean, goaded. Then she was so
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
known and so beloved, and had done Living Single at that point, and had hit records, and had been in House Party 2, and
Mm-hmm.
had been on Fresh Prince. So we were very familiar with her.
Mhm.
She had never played a queer character before, but what is so, I think, revolutionary and amazing is that it is not a thing. And what I love is because for the characters, Cleo's queerness is not a thing.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Even when she's like, hey
What?
Ashley,
Look, there was a
you know,
little, you know, little side comment. I feel like a little jab. Somebody
it,
made it
it,
a jab of some sort.
And you know,
well,
not
it's like,
even just that. There's this little moment, and I don't know if it was, you know, an eye
intentional.
rolling because it's weird because it's unclear, I think, of whether there's an eye rolling because of PDA or whether it's an eye rolling because
Yeah.
it's because it was gay.
Yeah.
But when the girlfriend first comes up and Cleo and the girlfriend
Or
start
if they just
kissing at
don't
the
like
begin
her for real.
right,
You know,
maybe
they
they
could
just
just
don't
not
like the
like her.
girlfriend. You know what I mean?
You
It's
know?
but I do think to that point it's not clear. And so
Mhm.
you can read it as, oh, here they go again. Like as
Right.
in like these are just my friends. They always make it out in public. I'm rolling my eyes because of that, or I don't like this specific girl, or if you prefer to read it as, you know, y'all doing that gay shit in front of me. Like, I think it's, I don't think it's definitive, which is kind of nice that you can kind of decide for your own self why they're rolling their eyes.
I will say this, because I've seen it more times than I can count. There's a moment when Frankie says hello to Ursula and she doesn't say anything. And Frankie says she can't speak. So now again, we don't know if it was a union rule or whatever, but what I love is that they're making it like Ursula does not care about Cleo's friends.
Right.
She has no desire to say hello, no desire to interact with them. Her focus is Cleo. I think the reason why the audience doesn't make a big deal out of Cleo's queerness is because the characters in the movie don't make a big deal out of it. And I think that's why I've taken that approach as well. Again, that impact is felt not just in terms of violence on screen, but in terms of how to have straight characters react to queer characters. And the thing that I tend to do in my work as well is that it's not an issue, it's not a thing. To the point where I've been told by older writers, like, you don't want to have this character like address the fact this character's gay, and I'm like, no, or trans. I'm like, no, because we're kind of showing the audience a new way to be. And I think Set It Off kind of showed us, yeah, you can have a masked woman in your crew and it not be a big deal. Because they clearly all grew up together. They do also acknowledge that on the roof.
With that, Lena, thanks so much for giving us some of your time today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This is amazing. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much to our guest this week, and thank you for tuning in to Black Queer Canon. Make sure to subscribe here on our YouTube channel and check back next week for our next episode.